Well, hello you. Let's talk about scales, shall we? So there are a multitude of different methods and philosophies for working advanced scales, right? There's the Flesh series, there's Galamian, there's the Brown Essentials book, there's the Barbara Barber has a book on it. There's just so many different methods and so many different ways that you can go about learning the scales that are 3 octaves, 2 octaves, all of that stuff. What I wanted was a standard method that I could use with my beginning players. Something more than just, oh, we've got this piece and this key coming up, so now let's learn that scale. I wanted a standard method that I could go through with every single student to get them to play all of the scales, not just the ones they're gonna commonly run into, but all of them nice and solid. So when I discovered the finger patterns from Barbara Barber's Fingerboard Geography, go get it, wonderful book, look at the last video, I went through and I started looking to see how these things could fit into the scales and maybe give me the system that I wanted. And what I discovered after I went through that system is that each 1 octave major scale can be placed into one of the 4 color finger patterns from that book. And it all depends on which finger you start off with. There's the red, blue, yellow, and green patterns. You have 1, 2, 3, 4 fingers. It works out perfectly. And when you are doing 2 octaves, you can just take 2 different colors and stitch them together. It works out so nicely. Now, when I get to more advanced 2 and 3 octave scales where a lot of shifting is required, I will head toward one of those different methods that I talked about at the beginning. I usually go with the Flesh personally, but to each their own. What I'm talking about in this series is how to get the beginning string player to be able to play every single key all the way around the circle of fifths with no fear at all. Everything in first position. Whiteboard time! So, let's first talk about why I like the finger pattern system and how it simplifies things from the way that we normally think about scales, right? If we think about just a simple D major scale, here's our lovely D major notes. You've got 8 notes, right? That you have to think about. So that's 8 notes on the way up, plus you have to think about the 8 notes on the way down. Then you have to think about, does each of those notes have an accidental? Do each of those notes on the way down have an accidental? Where do I start? Where do I end? That's 8, 16, 24, 30, 34 things that you have to think about. And sure, we're being a little hyperbolic, right? Because if you know your key signatures, you know that there's only 2 sharps you have to worry about. But still, that's still 16 notes. You have to think about, okay, where are those 2 sharps? It's still a lot. Now, if you think about the finger patterns and the colors, you have to think about where you start, where you turn around, and what color you're playing. 3 things, as opposed to 34 things. It's a more efficient way of thinking about things. They should still know all of the, yes, it's an F sharp here and it's a C sharp here and it's the circle of fifths and blah, blah, blah. They should know all of that from a theory point of view. That can come later. And for the heat of battle, as an old professor of mine used to say, you want to simplify things as much as you possibly can. So this gives them a way to just think more efficiently. So what I did after examining the finger patterns and which scales matched to which color, I split them up into primary and secondary categories. The primary scales are the friendlier keys, the ones that tend to be more resonant. You have more open strings, it's easier to tune them, right? So those are the primary keys. And I know you're seeing a couple on here that have a lot of sharps. We'll get there, don't worry. And the other great thing about this is we use these primary keys to take some of the fear out of these secondary keys. Because basically all that we do when we get to these guys is we're transposing these up and down by a half step, keeping them in the same finger pattern colors. The thing you have to keep in mind when you're working the system is these guys, don't ever talk about C flat being hard. Don't say, oh, there's 7 flats. Oh, it's really tricky. Oh no. Don't say it. Don't say it. And we'll get to why when we talk about the secondary scales themselves. For right now, we're just talking about the basic system, right? That's rule number 1 though. Do not say the scales are hard. So the primary and secondary scales we're going to introduce in a slightly different order, right? And the way that you go about them is a little bit different. The primary scales are going to go by the finger pattern colors. and we're going to introduce them in that order. This is the order that Barbara Barber introduces them in Fingerboard Geography. Starts off with red, goes to blue, yellow, and then green. And the beauty of this is that each of those just depends on what finger you start on. Red scales will start on open or 4. Use it. Blue will start on 3, yellow starts on 1, green starts on 2. Now by the time they get to the secondary scales, they've got a much better grasp. These should all be nice and comfortable. They should be able to play all of the primary scales nice and solid. So they've got a better grasp on things. So instead of introducing in the order of the colors, we're going to walk up the fingerboard. So walking up the fingerboard, we're going to start with the first finger scales. Those are the secondary yellows. Then we're going to go to second finger, green, third finger, blue, fourth finger, red. There are no secondary scales that start on an open string. We cover them all in the primaries. So that's the introduction to this scale system, starting with the major scales. I should say that I do this system with every student who comes in my studio. It doesn't matter if they're a beginner or if they've been playing for 10 years. I want to establish the vocabulary so that they don't look at me like I'm crazy when I say, oh, you played that red. I make sure that that's actually yellow there. So even if the student has extensive knowledge, they've been playing 3 octave scales, I'll run them through this real quick. The difference is they might do all the primaries in one lesson, all the secondaries in another lesson, or they might do the whole thing in one lesson. Whereas a beginner, it's going to take them a while to get through this. Maybe even a year. It's about the same time as the Suzuki Book 1, give or take. So from here, we're going to cover the primaries, every color in its own video, and then we'll do the secondaries. The minor scales are going to be a different series. Those are a little bit more complicated just because minor scales themselves are a little bit more complicated given the 3 different forms. So make sure that you like and subscribe and do all of that stuff so that you know when those are coming. And yeah, follow me on all the social medias, and happy scaling. Should have done a tech rehearsal. Tech rehearsal would have been good.